doesn't seem to be working very well. So have a sit down. So some people came, yes. Okay. We apologize for the heat in the room and the crowd, but I think that's some testimony to the enthusiasm and interest in the topic, and they're working on the air conditioning, I'm told. Tonight, the subject is Russia and Russia's futures. We're greatly honored to have Grigory Yavlinsky here as our speaker. Grigory's not a stranger to this environment, having been here I don't know how many times, but at least a half dozen, and each time we enjoy his coming back. As most of you know, he is the leading Democratic alternative presidential candidate in Russian politics, as he was in the 96 campaign and is likely to be in the 2000 campaign, or the campaign that occurs sooner than that, should the current president die in office. Or otherwise find an election being held. He's also the leader of the Yabloko group, which is the major political alternative to the major democratic reformist political alternative to the current government, and the third largest group, the third largest faction in the Duma, and the most coherent emergent political party in the context of developments in Russia today. There's a very good piece in this week's Moscow Times which identifies Yabloko as the only emergent political party in the context of Russian politics today, and Grigory may have something more to say about that. Grigory's an economist who's turned a politician, and in the current setting would be thought of as a political economist. We had a very good debate today at lunchtime about the economics of Russia, and some people may have questions about that. He was the author of the 500-day plan, which was a plan enunciated in 1989 and 90 for Russia's transformation to the market economy. He was the leader of the Russian group that proposed the Grand Bargain, which was substantial Western assistance for the transition of Russia to the market economy. With a group of us here, I had the honor to be the head of the American group, and Grigory brought a half dozen of his colleagues who were then they looked to be about 20 or 22 to work on this. They're all now members of the Yabloko faction in the Duma, and 3 of them are chairmen of relevant committees in the Duma. So this is a group that has gone on to distinguish themselves both for their analytic work but also for their political sense. He served in the final stages of the Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev as one of the 3, in effect, deputy prime ministers managing the final stage of the transition. He's the head of Epicenter, which is the first independent economic research institute in Russia, an institute that continues to do economic, political, and social analysis and produce a monthly publication. And I could go on and on because he's also a very good friend and a very good colleague of many of us here. He's agreed that tonight what he'll do is make a few provocative comments to begin with and mostly answer questions or engage in a discussion since he enjoys questions and answers more than speeches, and you may do too. After Grigory's comments, we're going to ask Richard Pipes, whom you know from here, a Harvard professor of history of great distinction, to make a few comments and ask the first question, and then we'll be open for arguments, counter-arguments, discussions, and all topics. So this meeting is on the record and is being recorded, and when we get to the questions, we'll ask you to use the microphones because this will be available on internet by tonight and for NPR tomorrow. So Grigory Yavlinsky.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really thankful ever so much for this kind invitation. I've really been here for several times, and I honored very much to be in Harvard once again. And frankly speaking, I'm more interested in your questions than in my answers. So that's why discussion about Russia for me is the most valuable thing, because Russian future is extremely questionable. That's why your questions is important. That's why every doubt about Russia's future must be noticed very carefully. Because, as you know, Russia is one of the largest countries in the world, and it's a country which still have the tremendous heritage from the Soviet Union, the Soviet system, such heritage as nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. So Russia as well has the longest borders with the most unstable regions in the world, especially on the south and southeast. So what happens in Russia for sure would affect the whole world. Nothing to say about Russian people and Europe. What are the possibilities for Russian future? One possibility is democracy, which would be based on market economy. The other possibility, which, if to look carefully what's going on in Russia just today, looks a little bit more likely that Russia would be oligarchic, cooperative system based on monopolistic ownership and criminal behavior. Just now it's a crossroad, and I think to the end of the century would be more or less clear which way, which goal, which direction my country is taking. For many reasons, mainly as a heritage of the previous system, and also I have to accept and recognize as a consequence of the failures in our economic and political reforms, most of these two goals, of the two possibilities, looks more possible, as I said before. And I'm going to speak to you in this short speech before your questions about the main problems which we have to solve in order to avoid this possibility. These main problems becomes as the main fundamentals of the system which already created in Russia. First of all, I'm going to speak about the economic fundamentals and economic main features in Russian system today, which gives the precondition for such developments. I'm going to speak about that from the point of view what is necessary to do to overcome these things. You know, every politician can always speak about the glass with the water, saying that this glass is half empty. The other one will say it is half full. So I'm going to speak from the second perspective, because very often I'm accused that I'm speaking all about the problems. So I'm trying to find the other way to explain what's going on in Russia. So the first task is to make in Russia clear property rights. We have just extremely unclear situation with the property rights. What it means, what is necessary to do? It's necessary to make property rights and the rights on the private ownership the first political priority. Russian president never expressed clearly that private property must be one of the priorities, political priorities of his policy. And the state is going to defend private property and all kind of property rights in the country by all means. Clarifying property rights means, as a consequence of our privatization, which was very unsuccessful from the economic point of view, means changing the management in the majority of Russian enterprises. The voucher privatization bring Russian industries to the state which I would call collectivization of industries. 80% of Russian enterprises is collected by 80% of Russian enterprises is managed and owned by insiders of these enterprises. The outsiders are all the owners. So it's extremely difficult to find who's responsible for what is the structure of the property. So it looks like a collective farms more than like a private enterprises. Changing the management of Russian enterprises is necessary also because the old managers are still in place. The old managers which are rooted in Soviet nomenclature, and the average age of Russian managers of Russian enterprises is just now about 50 years old. It's approximately the same that we have at the end of 80s. At the end of 80s we have about 51. Now we have about 48 or 49. So as you can imagine, the privatization which happened in Russia, which changed a lot, which was a big noise, which was strongly supported by your country, for example, have no economic results. We still have decline, we have the old management, we have no investments on these enterprises. Bankruptcies is one more absolutely necessary procedure, which in Russia we have not yet accomplished. We have even for 5 years the law about bankruptcies, which was written by my team 8 years ago, but it is still not enforced. Only one fact which would explain what's going on with us: we have a 60% decline in last 7 years of production, and we have 3% unemployment. Official unemployment in Russia is about 3%, and decline of industrial production is about 60%. So, all this number of questions shows that property rights, the structures of ownership in Russia, is not accomplished at all. As you know, the effective market economy have two main basic stones or cornerstones. It's private ownership and competition. Two, not one. So the second task, which we have nothing positive at the moment, is a competition and destroying Soviet monopolies. Soviet monopolies are still in place. In this 5 or 7 years of reforms, there was no such objective to destroy Soviet monopolies. And as a result of that, we can say that 100 biggest companies produce 50% of GDP, but employs only 3% of labor force. 3% of labor force produces 50% of GDP. This is the structure of Russian production. So, medium and small enterprises is not in place at all. Small businesses is not the mainstream in Russian economy. Still, Russian economy is based on huge monopolies and also on natural monopolies, which are certainly one of the main disadvantages of Russian economy. That's why we are not competitive. That's why you can hardly find the clear, right, civilized, entrepreneurial spirit in Russian industries and in Russian economic environment. Introducing competition also means introducing new rules of the game. The government is declaring, this is the third point, the government is declaring all the time, last half a year, that they are ready to start new rules of the game. What means in Russian conditions, new rules in the game? Russian condition means to make separate power and business. That means for us new rules of the game. Just now we have a clear oligarchic structure. Power and business are the same. The same people, the richest people, which have the parts of the property, are the same people who are in the government. It's simply the same job. There is no any difference between the behavior in the government or the behavior in the business. This is extremely painful for creating in Russia real civilized relations which would be based on the civil code. The separation of the political structures from the business structures is one of the extremely important tasks in terms of the new rules of the game. Certainly, these new rules of the game must include open procedures, public information about everything, public control, free press, which is talking about all these things. I think that every responsible politician in Russia just now would say to you that this is not in place. This is not really what we have. One of the most important tasks to avoid such possible developments of Russia to the criminal side is certainly private property on land. I would take it separately and I would tell you I would stress it very strongly. When you would hear about success of Russian reform once again, and it is always repeated everywhere that Russia have a success of reform. It was reported not so long ago that Russia has the best Minister of Finance in the world, by the way, as well. So you must question one very important thing. What happens with the private property on land? It is still in the hands of the state, but it's better to say it's still in the hands of the oligarchic corporative representatives of this state. Having no private property on land, you can't speak about real privatization. Who's going to buy the enterprise without land? What he's going to do with this? Two last points, which are the real task for Russian transformation. It's reducing criminal pressure, because the absence of the juridical system, weakness of Russian courts, very weak political stream from the side of the president or move of the president to solve this extremely important question about the third power in Russia creates extremely criminal environment. The criminal pressure on the people, especially in the economics and business, is very, very high. And that certainly slows down any kind of positive changes. And the last thing, but not least certainly, it's a real, deep and serious decentralization of power, making a real federation in Russia. Just
Moscow concentrated 85% of financial resources of the country. In such conditions, it's very hard to say that we are, to the regions, we are a more liberal country than it was before. But without the move from below, without reform from the grassroots, we would never realize the plan of transforming the country. This is impossible. There is no such move. We started reforms in Nizhny 5 years ago. I was the architect of that plan. Now you see Mr. Nemtsov is very successful. He's in the government and so on and so far. But that was the only one example. It was not the initiative which was developed by the president, by the government. I want to repeat the thing which I was saying once here in Harvard. Russian economy was not damaged by central planning. The economy of Poland was damaged by central planning, Czech Republic, many others in the Eastern Europe. Russian economy was created by central planning from the very beginning, from the grassroots, from every sport. So if you want to change something here, you have to go down from the place where the people are living and start from that place. What it means to create the market of housing. It means to create labor market. It means to create small and very small businesses. It means to create the personal, individual initiative. All those processes are frozen. That's the big problem. That's why we are much less successful than Poland, Czech Republic, many other countries. So this is the main 7 directions, what we must do. Property rights, demonopolization, competition. It's absolutely crucial for us. Now, in the short run, what is necessary to do just today or tomorrow? In the short run, the main things are taxes. We must have reasonable tax system. Being in the university, I want to take a privilege speaking in the university audience. I want to present you one new idea about the taxes in Russia. I want to say that taxes is not the most favorite thing for Russian people. Maybe you would be very much surprised. The Russian people is not very much prepared to pay taxes. Also because half of the population simply is not paid themselves. They don't know how to pay taxes if they are not paying salaries. And they have a very easy relations with the state. They're saying, you're not paying to us, how can we pay to you? But the state is saying, instead of that, we have a low inflation. People are saying, okay, no population, no inflation, it's easy. You can certainly stop paying to us, you would never have inflation. We would have no salaries, we're not buying anything, only foreigners would come, and some money which is coming from oil and gas, and they're going to buy very expensive things in Moscow, because Moscow is definitely much more expensive than the United States. It's uncomparable. Today morning I was taking breakfast, I look at that list. I've a menu somewhere in the restaurant. I had a feeling that I'm sitting in the special dining room for the members of the Politburo, because it's a very strange prices. $5, $3, $6, $2. You can never see such things in Moscow. It's impossible. Only 2 figures. 2 figures. There is no such price, $2. Nothing. No. It's in the country where half of population is not paid at all. So it's a very, very interesting precedent. So that is the current situation with the taxes, which is certainly the people don't want to pay. The enterprises are not paying these taxes and all this. But what I think that if we want really to have an economic growth in Russia, we need a different approach to the taxes. We need a tax code with 3 or 4 taxes, which would be extremely low. The level of the taxes must be not higher than 15%. And 1 or 2 local taxes, maybe added. To compare all that, I want to say that today we have about 70 taxes, and the all amount of the taxes is about 85–90%. That's why the people are so encouraged to do something. I don't believe that Russian government in the nearest future would be prepared or would be able to be smarter in using the money than the people. I don't believe that. I don't believe that the government would be able to use this money in such a way that they would support small businesses, progress in developing the enterprises and things like that. That's why I think in such a crisis situation and at the beginning of everything, of new life, possible beginning of new life in Russia, we have to give the people as many possibilities as it is possible. But how to support the budget? The budget, we have to use the same things which was used at the Soviet time. Because all these people were producing weapons. They were not producing money from the budget in the Soviet time. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union had the largest army in the world, have the space ships going to the moon, have the KGB, which was everywhere, spies. I was shocked when I was first time in the White House and I was reading on the telephone, "Keep quiet, KGB is listening to you." I never saw such things in Russia, but in White House it were there. So it was very expensive entertainment to listen to every guy in the American government. You have a big government, so very big. So we had to have a lot of people to listen to them. Where did the Soviet Union took money for that? Oil and gas, diamonds and gold, natural resources. So please use these natural resources to support the budget. Make the public control on that. You can certainly have private companies which are researching that, but in the same time you must have a public control on these resources, and that gives you the possibility to make extremely low taxes for all the others, and that would be the breakthrough forward. Instead of that, 10,000 people are just now using Russian resources, all of them. Certainly they are buying islands in the Mediterranean, the old streets in London, and I don't know what else. This is the very important vision of what is necessary to do, conceptual thing, what is necessary to do in Russia. I was very often asked why President Clinton was so happy with the new tax code, which Mr. Chubais and Mr. Yeltsin presented to the Duma not so long ago, because Mr. Clinton in Denver was very happy about that and congratulates them with this tax code, because the levels of the taxes in this tax code is the same, about 80%. The number of the taxes is more than 40. And the tax code is not liberal. The tax code is like a constitution for the police state. The only answer I can give to my voters when they are asking me about American president, I'm saying maybe he was not reading this tax code. I'm sure he was not. So, secondly, second task is strong and clear support for small businesses. I want to declare the next government of Russia must be the government of small businesses. That means that it will be the government of the middle class, or future middle class, whatever. But that must be the government of small businesses, but not of the enormous oligarchs, which thinks that they are the banks. You know the story about Russian banks who are controlling everything and that, but it is not the banks. The bank, if you would take a textbook, you'll see the bank is the body or an institution which is taking money from the people and putting this money to the industries. That's what means bank. In Russia, banks means taking money from the budget and putting it to the Swiss bank. This is absolutely different procedure. So it is really so. That's why last year the capital flow from Russia was $22 billion. So guarantees to the investors. This is the third task, which must be as soon as possible be a priority for the government. And as I said before, control on natural monopolies. Now I'm going to speak a little bit about the political situation in Russian political reforms. First of all, I want to tell you that Russian reforms for a very long time must be like a bicycle riding, left and right in terms political reform, economic reform, political reform, economic reform. The bicycle of Mr. Gorbachev fell down because he was making political reforms only. He was doing anything in economics. Mr. Yeltsin reached the situation with the tanks on the bridge when he should in the parliament, only because he was doing only economic transformation, doing absolutely nothing in the political reform. Russian transformation is such a huge thing that you can't make one thing. You always have to do this and this, this and that. The same I want to underline from the point of view of politics in Russia. Often is a discussion. Who must be the government? Liberals or social democrats? It's extremely funny discussion for Russia. In Europe, liberals, when liberals are coming to the power, they're making a big pie. Then social democrats are coming and eating this pie. Then liberals comes again, making a pie. Then social democrats comes again, eating this pie. That's the way of doing things. Russia had no such possibility. Maybe later on, but not now. Now we must have a liberal approach in the economy to make a pie. And we have to understand we have enormous heritage, very difficult heritage from the previous time. So we have to immediately take a piece of this pie and give it for eating just now. In order to support one new step in this liberal transformation, in this liberal economic approach. Liberal approach and social understanding. That's the model for moving forward. Without blood, without war, without conflicts. I don't know what it means in the political theory, but I know what it means when we are not doing it this way, when we are not combining these two very important things to move forward. That's why Russian politics is always so unstable that Russian president have no real clear vision of ideology which he want to realize in this reform. From this point of view, I certainly want to say I was an opponent of Mr. Yeltsin. I have a very good feelings about him personally. I'm very thankful to him. He opened the door to the politics for me in 1990. But in terms of his politics, internal, external, and economic, I'm his opponent. I disagree with what he's doing. And the problem of Russia just now, a year ago, I was in the United States. Every single person was asking me, what about your president? What happens with Yeltsin and all that? And my answer was, don't worry. He would be okay physically. I had no doubts in this sense. There were no doubts. And once I even said, when I was asked very much on the Hill, making a presentation, what about Mr. Levitt? Mr. Levitt already started his presidential campaign against Mr. Yeltsin. I said, if you would see Mr. Levitt, tell him that Mr. Yeltsin would catch a call on his funeral to Mr. Levitt. So don't be, keep yours in hands, Mr. Levitt. But the problem what we had and what we have and what we would have this year would be different. The time of Mr. Yeltsin passed. We elected a person which time passed. This is not a case of his physical health. This is a case of his vision of the life, vision of the power, vision of Russia, understanding what is necessary to do and what is not. He was the strongest man in the country who was destroying communist system. But just now, the task of destroying communist system gone. We have a different task. Task to avoid criminal, oligarchic, corporative state. That's where we are moving just now. We should build just now a civil society, open society, instead of making in the country wild, corporative, oligarchic, criminal system with some elements of capitalism, which gives it some respectability to this system. And this task for Mr. Yeltsin, from my point of view, is not, he would not be able to lead to do this. So this 3 years before 2000, in political terms, we would be in this kind of a stagnation because we would not be able to break through this wall. That means that one of the most important tasks for us is the task to have a government which this year would operate in the right way. From the point of view of current government, what is the main problem of this government and what are the main tasks for this government? The main problem of this government is that this government have no confidence. Simply no. Every kid in Russia thinks that this is a corrupted government. Everyone. I'm not sure that even the wives of the members of the government are ready to support them as a government. But this is maybe the only who would be supportive. And I want to say you one more rule which I feel from Russian reform. This rule is, if the government have no confidence, it is not able to do anything in the reform. To change the world, to change the life of the people, people have to believe to those who are saying what they're going to do. They have to believe that this is the honest people and this is the professional people. They're trying to do their best, at least trying to do their best. But Russian political system is organized in such a way that the government have no feedback with the people at all. The Russian government is the staff of the Russian president. And this is not a public government. This is not a civil government. There is no mechanism to ask the government, what are you doing, guys, there? There is no. They can come to the parliament, they can ignore. The parliament is not able to do anything with them. They are the staff of Mr. Yeltsin. Mr. Yeltsin is elected president, he has to and there is no feedback between the government and the society, between the government and the people. This is maybe the most difficult problem for this government to do something. Because when the government is saying, we are going to introduce new rules of the game, people are saying, who is going to introduce new rules of the game? And oligarchs are adding, you are going to introduce new rules of the game. You, who was playing the different game 5 years with us, who was cutting the property into pieces and gave us for free. Now, from Monday, you are saying that now you are clean and you are going to play a new game. That wouldn't happen. That is the problem which is very hard to overcome. This is the problem of the government. In this sense, everybody who is looking carefully what's happening in Russia can see what's happening with Mr. Nemtsov. Mr. Nemtsov came to the government, and just now he has the highest rating in the polls because he is the man whom the people want to see the future, whom the people want to trust. But the big question is, who would be stronger? Mr. Nemtsov would take government up, or the oldest team would take it down. This is a big question mark from this political side. And the last issue. The last issue is that we have extremely authoritarian constitution. This is a constitution which was made for one man, whose name is Yeltsin. That's why when he have a headache, all country have a stomachache. Immediately. This is something terrible, because even young men can be sick and go to the hospital. That means in Russia, if the president in the hospital, the people start thinking that tomorrow may be a coup, it would be change of the political system even. It's impossible. So the task, one of the political tasks, is to make a transformation in our political system in such a way to make it stable. Political system of the country can't rely only on one person, as we have today in Russia. All political system is organized on one person. Is it a democratic situation? There is no checks and balances. The president have a right to start the war as he did it with Chechnya in one day. He take a coffee, and then he said, maybe it is necessary to do something in the Caucasus, and started the war and killed 100,000 people there. And the Constitutional Court said that, okay, no questions to the president. So that's one more issue for changes in our political system. And all these things must be done together in the same time, step by step, creating a new responsible government, changes in the amendments in the Constitution, introducing the juridical system, enforcement of the laws, free press, because we again have no free press in the country. This is one more very important issue. In 1990, when we adopted the law about free press, we had in mind that the main task is simply to stop the system where you have a censor which is sitting in the room nearby and signing every article. Is it allowed to be published or not? Now we understand that it was not the most difficult thing. Just now all the press is monopolized by financial structures, these banks, but as the banks are parts of the government monopolized the press. All television channels, nevertheless private or public, all newspapers, this press is only allowed to make some funny stories, but not the political discussions there. very important issue. So all those tasks, that's what we have. We have to solve. To be optimistic, I have to say that we must do it in these 3 years, even before presidential elections. To be realistic, I would say it'll be good if we would have a possibility to start those changes after the new presidential elections. But when I'm asked very often whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist in Russia, I'm saying if you are the optimist in Russia, that means that the first failure, which definitely would happen, would paralyze you. If you are a pessimist in Russia, it means that you are paralyzed from the very beginning. So the only rule for Russia is just do it. That's exactly what I'm doing. Thank you.
So now we will have a comment from Professor Richard Pipes with a question, and then we'll be open for questions.
Well, I welcome in Mr. Yavlinsky, a representative of the younger generation of Russian politicians. I don't know where he stands in relation to the age of 50, but on this side or the other side, but he's younger in my eyes. That's good, because I think the future of Russia is in the hands of the younger people who are not frightened or burdened by the memory of communism and don't look nostalgically back at it. My heart was warmed when I heard him stress in the very first minute of his speech private property. I've just finished a big book on the subject, and my argument is that not only is not only are guarantees of private property essential for economic progress, but also for the development of liberty. The development of private property in Russia is proceeding, as he pointed out, in a very convoluted form, which is very difficult for foreigners to follow. In the case of land, we are encountering deeply seated traditions, in traditions of Russian peasantry, that land is not a commodity, land should not be sold. All attempts in the past, under Stolypin and others, to make land a commodity have failed, and some profound changes have to be made in the psyche of Russians to alter them. I am not an economist, my interests are in politics, but I would like to stress one other great problem which Russia faces, which Mr. Yavlinsky did not allude to, which is the very weak development of party structures, political parties. This was true of Russia even during that brief constitutional period, which occurred during the decade preceding the communist coup d'etat. But it is very strongly embedded now, this prejudice against parties, because people identify political parties with the Communist Party, and they don't want that. Now that is a very dangerous situation, because what happens is now that the democratic forces, represented by Mr. Yavlinsky and some others, are scattered, are divided, whereas the communists and the nationalists are united. Although, according to all public opinion polls, something like 2/3 of the Russian population is reform-minded and pro-democratic, in the Duma, it is the communists and the nationalists who dominate, because they present, the communists in particular, present one slate in elections, whereas the Democrats are scattered. We have the Yabloko party, we have our Home Russia party, we have other parties of this kind. I think it's absolutely imperative that these parties get together, otherwise I think tragedy will happen. In the presidential elections, which Yeltsin won, he won only because the other parties scattered their vote, the other nationalist parties. If you add the vote of Zyuganov, Lebedь, and Zhirinovsky, these people who represent the demagogic right, they got, I think, 52% of the vote. It is absolutely essential, it seems to me, for the democratic parties to get together to overcome their doctrinal and other personal differences. Otherwise, I'm afraid the others may well win the elections, and none of the reforms, which Mr. Yavlinsky mentioned, will take place. The polls indicate that something like 60% of Russians look back with nostalgia at the communist period. Though when asked, would you like communism to come back, half of them say no, under no conditions. But it's all a very precarious situation, and I would urge Mr. Jablinski, Mr. Gaidar, and others who share basically the same principles, even if they do not agree on all the tactics, to get together and for the next elections to present one candidate rather than scatter the votes. Now I've been asked to ask 2 questions, and I will ask them. I've been asked to ask a question, I will ask 2 questions. One is, do you believe that the spread of private property, even in this semi-legal criminal form, will encourage the development of legality and democracy in Russia? In the West, too, private property often began in banditry, in theft. And eventually, the people who acquired the property in this way, landed property, and later on other forms of property, developed a vested interest in legality because they wanted law to protect their properties. I wonder if he thinks the same thing will happen in Russia. Secondly, I'm very troubled by constant signs that the democratic forces in Russia, as represented presently by Yeltsin, are adopting more and more nationalistic slogans. The latest church law, which was passed overwhelmingly by the Duma and in effect praised by Yeltsin, is a sign in this direction. Yeltsin was quoted the other day as saying that he thinks the United States should stay out of Europe. I saw him when I was in Moscow 2 weeks ago. I saw him on television announcing that he will not allow Smirnoff vodka to be imported into Russia because it's foreign, and Smirnoff vodka in Russia is better. These are ugly things. I understand why he does them. He needs the support of nationalist circles. But democracy in Russia and Russian variety of nationalism are not compatible. You have one or the other. And it seems to me that something should be done, or something should be said at least, critical of this trend towards exploitation of nationalist slogans by people who fundamentally are pro-Western and anti-xenophobic. Thank you.
I will start with the question number 1, when I was asked by Professor Parks whether the private property itself, as it goes just now, would sooner or later bring us to the normal, market, democratic, legal order. He was asking me whether I believe in that. The answer is yes, I do. In 200 years, like your country, if we have time to wait, why not? This is the argument of a very special group in our country among the reformers. They're saying, we don't care. Criminality, don't care. In Chicago was also criminality, no problem. Barons, in the United States was a lot of barons, but their grandchildren would be very respected people, and everything would be great with this. I disagree with such approach. I have no 200 years for that. I have no this time. And my children and grandchildren as well. And I have a more practical sentiment about that. The developments in the 18th century, 19th century was very different from the developments in 20th century and the next century. Very different. And especially Russia. I mentioned from the very beginning, Russia is the country which has nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. You think this disorder is possible to go along with these things for 200 years? I don't believe in that. Last year, in 1996, a year ago, the director of the Russian Thermonuclear Center, which is producing thermonuclear weapons since 1958, storing them and doing all research about them and producing them. The director of this thermonuclear center, academician Nechai, committed a suicide. It was in October 96. And he wrote in his note that he committed the suicide because he can't guarantee no security to the people, 50,000 people which are working there, no the security for Russia, no security for Europe, no security for the world. That is one of the explanations what can happen if we would go in this way. What happened to this money? Easy. This money is simply stolen from the budget, going to the banks, those banks which I described to you before. That's how it works. I don't think that for us, I want to say strong, no, this is not a future for us. We wouldn't able to reach it. I don't believe that they would repeated the experience which happened in the United States. It was a different time, different historical momentum. In 21st century Russia, that wouldn't work like this. And don't forget that we have the very special borders, and the next century would be very different from the 19th and 18th century. Second issue. You said, Professor, that you understand why Yeltsin is doing these nationalistic sentiments. And my answer is, I do not understand why he's doing such nationalistic statements. I can guarantee you for 100% there is no need of such things in Russia. There is no such mood. There is no such feelings in the country which would help Yeltsin if he's going to say such stupid things. When he's saying about foreign vodka or about McDonald's, some crazy things, there is no need in that. It's better to pay salaries, you know. It's much better. The people is waiting for salaries, not for expressions of the president that he don't want to drink foreign vodka. The people expect from the president that he would not drink vodka at all. Now, you were saying about the divided parties, but that contradicts with the last question. It contradicts with the last question, because we have no such division anymore. The Democrats which are split, no. There is a parties like parties which you mentioned. This is the parties which by all their political practice supporting corporative criminal system. It's simply a reality. And the government of these parties is the architect of this corporative criminal system, which maybe idealistically have in mind that in 200 years we would be in a better position, the grandchildren and so on, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe. But at the moment, this is not the democratic parties.
Are you the only pure democratic party?
No, not me. Not me. I understand your question. I'm not pure. I'm not pure. I have many problems. But I'm not just now. You see, I avoid talking about the parties, not because I do not understand this importance of the political parties in my country, because there is, at the moment, I'm sorry, but there is only two parties. The Communist Party as it is, and the other party which is trying to be a civil party. It is small, it is weak, but it's the only one. There is no other parties. Our Houses Russia is not a party. It's a thing which was built from the top by the government. That's why it is collapsing. The question is, why the government is doing such successful reforms? Why Yeltsin, who was supported by the majority of the population, is not able to make a party in 10 years, having money, having resources, having press, having everything. Why? Because we have a different political structure. We have a party of power, which means the party which creates this corporative criminal system, which leads this criminal system, and the other parties which is supporting in this other way this party of power. We have something which one can call marginal communist party. It's not really a communist party anymore. We have a democratic opposition, And we maybe would have nationalistic opposition, but we have no them at the moment. This is the political structure of Russian society. Now, what about the law of religious? It's a deal. The religious law is a deal between the Patriarch and Yeltsin, strongly supported by communists and Zhirinovsky, and our House of Russia and the others. That's what is this. Nothing else. As far as I understand, Yeltsin made a veto because he had a conversation with his friends, the other presidents. But then he refused to change it. He put the same thing once again with a different name. And the majority in the Duma, communists and Zhirinovsky and all this, they supported this project and they voted for them. By the way, the government, which have no public support, have to use communists and Zhirinovsky, and they're using them for budget, for tax code, for things like that. And they're feeding communist fascism in Russia because they're paying for these votes. Pay in a very direct way, simply pay, and that's it. In this way, they're developing the most aggressive and the most reactionary forces in the country. And this is the thing which is necessary to understand in Russian politics. That's why sometimes in Russian political statements you can find that we have a government of Zyuganov, Chernomyrdin, and Zhirinovsky. This is the leading forces which is officially in power at the moment. Please, your questions.
So for the questions, let me ask, since we want to use the microphones, and so this will be picked up for broadcast, go to the microphones, say your name quickly, and the questions briefly, which is Joe and I often remind us things that end with a question mark. George.
My name is George Appling. I'm a student here. Francis Fukuyama recently argued that cultures with low social trust have a difficult time developing large business organizations because they cannot separate ownership from management. He also points out that Russia is characterized by low social trust. And as many of us read and you mentioned, Russia has very large organizations. I'm wondering if you think that Russia's low level of social trust will be an impediment to good governance or management of large organizations.
Sort of.
Okay. A little convoluted question. Fukuyama argues that low social trust in a society makes it difficult for that society to develop large business organizations because they can't separate management from ownership. There's not the trust to do that. So, and he has lots and lots of examples. He also mentions that Russia has a low level of social trust. And we also know that Russia has large business organizations. And I'm wondering if...
I was saying about different thing. When I was saying that there is no difference between business and management, I mean not the management of the firm, not the management of company. I was talking about government and presidential structures. I was talking about power, not about the management of the company. This is a completely different thing.
I'm asking about management of companies, yeah.
But you're asking about the management inside the companies.
Yes.
But that's different. That's different. There is such a problem. This problem comes from this failures in privatization because the shares were given for vouchers and they were distributed in the way they did not create a real effective owner. There is no effective owner in this structure. That's what happened there. But I was talking about a different thing. I was saying that today power in Russia and business, big business, are together. It's one thing. That is very bad. That's why I'm saying about the corporate oligarchic system of rulership. And that kills the competition and kills the property rights if incomes are coming from your position in the government. What you are asking me, That's a different issue, and this is not a problem. This was not a problem when the privatization started. Just now, the companies are in such a weak position that it's necessary to come up to every single enterprise and to change the management. It is possible to do only through bankruptcies. The bankruptcies would create a management from outside. Outside management would bring the restructuring to the companies, and that would be the beginning of their future.
Over here on the left.
Yes, sir. Scott Norwood, National Security Fellow at Harvard. Two-part question. A friend of mine recently said that no time in human history has so much wealth been stolen from so many so quickly by so few, characterizing the privatization of assets and Russian liquidation. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of what you think the role of corruption and crime was in the liquidation of those assets, a little, most, the main thing. Secondly is, if you were king question, you've addressed the issues of tax reform on the one hand and private property rights on the other. If I can ask you to stake your position relative to another extreme, that is, there are those who argue that what's necessary to fix criminalization of the economy is direct control of state borders to prevent the one-way flow of intellectual and material capital, offers of amnesty to criminals and putting lots of people in jail if they don't accept amnesty, the state recontrolling assets which have been distributed until there's a legal system to allow for their just distribution. How far do civil liberties need to be repressed to not solve the problem in 200 years, but in the time frame that's acceptable to you?
What about corruption? Corruption in Russia is not anymore a personal story. This is not a story that this or other member of the government or this or other official was corrupted, he took bribes and things like that. This is a political and economic fundamental in Russia at the moment. Corruption in Russia is changing the politics. The story of the Chechen War, when it would be on the paper, would describe and would explain to you what was the role of corruption for the beginning of this war, killing 100,000 people there. Corruption is preventing any kind of a smart and visible economic policy because it changed any kind of decision. It changed any kind of, even the budget policy is senseless because of corruption, because you can't control expenditures. You simply can't control the expenditures of the budget because of corruption. Why corruption is such terrible? Certainly it's a heritage of the previous time. Certainly there is a tradition, certainly, but this is not the main reason. The main reason is that there is no political sensitivity and no political will to stop corruption in Russia. I'll tell you, you would ask me how to fight the corruption, it's so difficult and so on and so forth. Yes, it is. But for the beginning, you must ask, if you are a president, you have to ask your government to come in the room and to say, every person, every kid, everybody in the country thinks that we have a corrupted government. I'm not a police. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not an investigator. I don't know what you have in your pockets. I'm a president. I'm not going to look. But what I know, that I need a clean government. So I'm asking you to leave the government, you all, because everybody thinks about you like about corrupted people. If you would be clean and if would not be a problem, next year, year after that, I would apologize. But just now, leave the government immediately. What that means, political will. This is never happening. In 7 years, no one member of the government was taken out with a clear statement that he was corrupted or because he discredited the government in this sense. That's what happened in Russia with the corruption. And after that, after such a political steps, you certainly have to make more liberal procedures, less regulations, more decentralization, more liberal government, and that would decrease corruption to the possible level. I don't believe that it's possible to make zero of corruption in Russia, but it certainly can be the political and institutional and economic fight against corruption. That's what we have known. That's why the experts, there is such a private, not private, but non-governmental institution, Transparency International. Maybe you heard about that. This is the organization which is measuring corruption in different countries. And I can tell you, last year they took 58 countries. The last country is Nigeria, number 58. That's the highest corruption there. The number one, the lowest corruption, was last year New Zealand. Russia was 47 after Colombia, after Bolivia, and all that. So that's what happened in Russian corruption. But, as you know, IMF is giving loans every year, not taking care about corruption, whatever. So it is not anymore political. It is not yet a political issue. I would wonder whether Nigeria would ask for a loan, IMF. Are they prepared to give the loan now in such a corruption? For Russia, it works. The government feels themselves very comfortable in this situation. What about the money which went out from the country? My position, my point is, money gone. Only after inside investors in Russia, inside Russia, would start invest, and it would be stop the capital flow out the country, then we must use special procedures to take money inside. But after that, it's gone.
Okay. Only one question to the customer, please.
Thank you. One short question. My name is Marcus Blasitz. I'm a Kennedy School student. You mentioned the low credibility of the Russian government, and you briefly mentioned the conflict in Chechnya. Now, my understanding is that Russia actually is a multi-ethnic country with a lot of national minorities. What actually does the low credibility of the Russian central government mean to those minorities, and if there is such a thing as nationalist movements among those small groups, what does that mean for the political and economic stability of the whole country? Thank you.
We certainly have problems with the small national republics in the country, and it sounds, sometimes it sounds in the most difficult way, when it declared some kind of an independence, and they have a formula. Own government is better than the good government. I can assure you that if you would sometimes hear such a formula in your country, that means finished. You will not be able to overcome that. It's a metaphysical thing. Own government is better than the good government. So you would never convince Tatars that they have no right for their own state inside Russia, because Moldova has its own state. And it's impossible to convince Bashkirs why Moldova can have it. So it's better not to reach this level of situation that such things, nationalistic things, comes. But I want to say, to the very big extent, it's a problem of the government itself. Because if you want to have a multi-ethnic country, and you want not to have troubles with this, you must have in Moscow. You must have Bashkir's television programs in Moscow. You must have more schools in Moscow, and so on and so forth. Nothing exists. That's why the nationalists are taking the banner of the cultural independence, and that works. Instead of making that with the understanding that Russia is a really multinational country. But this is not a case of the government. Maybe sometimes that will be the case, that we have a government which is not representing the all nationalities and all that and all this. Which is now the problem of the government is that simply the people think that the government are full of thieves. And there is no problem for the people which nationality.
Okay, here.
My name is Sergei Konoplev, and I'm with Ukrainian National Security Program. My question is, what in your opinion is the economic dependency of former Soviet republics from the situation of economy in Russia, and if any, is it used by Russia with political purposes?
Russia had no clear policy to the former Soviet Union republics at all. But I want to praise the president that he signed the treaty with Ukraine, and I'm very happy about that. This is maybe the only one clear and understandable step in this direction. But as a trend, Russia simply have no such policy. But then Russia is using the economic difficulties, everybody is using the economic difficulties of each other to find its own goals and to find its own way. So there is nothing special. I was and I am the man who is supporting economic treaty, economic accord, or common market between Russia and former Soviet Union Republic. And I'm against, strongly against, the political unions or military unions like President Yeltsin was trying to make with President Lukashenko. We were the only one party, by the way, who were not agree with that so strongly that we leave the parliament when Lukashenko came in, as we were the only one party among all the others who were against the religious law, which is only Yamato was not voting for that. In the parliament, 6 people voted against that, yes, but 60 people were not voting as a protest, because we even didn't get a right to discuss this. So this is the answer. So I for the common market and all these things. Sometimes Russia is using the difficulties for political reasons, but the problem of Russia is that they have no idea for what political reasons to use them. So don't worry.
Hello, my name is Andrea Curdy. My question has to do with law enforcement. You spoke a little bit about problems collecting taxes, which obviously has other causes, but also lowering criminal activity in Russia. What do you think is the best hope for strengthening the legal system, both in terms of enforcement and just legal effectiveness in general?
You know, it's necessary to use a lot of time for that. But the step number 1 is when the government and the president will stop violating the laws. The characteristic feature of the Russian system just now is that we have 2 groups of people who are violating the law constantly. There's the very top and the very bottom. When the very top is using the very bottom, it's very difficult. It's like a disaster. But the problem is that the government and the president is violating the laws very often. Before that, after that, before we will stop that, there is no way. So that's why I'm talking about you, President, your feelings about what means law, what means law and order, and you understanding. So I think that would happen after 2000, not earlier.
Matthew Kutra. Mr. Yavlinsky, I gather that you're not perhaps too keen on Mr. Nemtsov, but my question is with regards to his latest privatization program for Swazi Invest and the financial allowance for financial input also from this country, from America. Do you think that this represents a certain breakthrough in Russian privatizations, and do you think that why do you think it's not possible, if you think that, for Mr. Nemtsov to deliver more of foreign investment, more liberalization, and is this not the first one of the, obviously a long way, but at least the first successful one of delivering more of a market economy with strategic investors, perhaps not only financial investors in the future?
First of all, I want to say that I'm a supporter of Mr. Nemtsov. My party and I, we are supporting Nemtsov, and we would support Nemtsov. But everybody have to understand, Nemtsov is a very lonely figure in the government, and he have only two possibilities: or to follow the line of the government, which was before, or he would be in the place like Levitt, out. His main strength is, at the moment, that he can pick up the phone and speak to the president. The day the president would not take the phone, it'll be the last day of political life there. Because, as we were discussing today, there is no public backing, there is no political parties, his own political parties. And he came to the government when he was simply asked by the president, "Come here, you have to decorate my government," and he came in. Yes? And he was announced as a main man to fight the monopolies. Yes? Being the first deputy of the largest monopolist of the world. So it's like to be a deputy of the Tsar for revolution, you know? He's coming to Mr. Chernomyrdin and saying, "Please, may I break some monopolies?" He's saying, "Be careful. You can a little bit, better to say simply on television, but don't touch them." That's what we see. That's what is in the reality. You know, it's a Byzantia. It's the people are used simply to present new ideas for some time. Then these people are thrown away, the other people is for decoration, and then one more. That's why it's so difficult to move with the reforms. What about the Swazinvest auction? Nothing new happened. Simply, the government was backing one of the. There were three partners in the deal: government and two banks. And the government was backing one of them, and they together tricked the third one. So it's business in Russian way. That's why it was a scandal of such time. The only difference in this auction was that it was a fresh money, which really came for the first time. Yes, but it was half of that which can come, and it came from the side which was not the winner in the auction. It was supported by the government. That's why they came in, and so on and so forth. So it was not a real auction. Now, why he can't convince the foreign investors, strategic investors, yes? Maybe because some of them were studying in Harvard or some other universities, and they're not so stupid. That is the main problem of our government, I'm afraid. Because the foreign investors would come when Russian investors would start to invest. The strategic investor is not prepared to have a safari in Russia, you know? They want to invest, but not to take part in the safari. As for today, it's like a safari for them. That's why they're afraid.
So you don't think that Mr. Nemtsov has the power to actually liberalize the market so that they will come in?
Mr. Nemtsov has a very special, limited responsibilities. We are talking with you seriously, not like in newspapers. We have a very limited and very special responsibilities. I want you to understand how it works. For example, with Mr. Nemtsov, we're creating a decree. It was a decree about auctions. When he came in, I said to him, here is the package of things which is necessary to do. Let us start. Here is the decree about auctions, okay? Look, we need auctions everywhere. for example, military is buying food, it must be the auction. Otherwise, they're using the highest prices and they're taking half of the price themselves, and that means corruption and all this. We would never be able to move. We would never be able to have a budget and things like that. He said, what a great idea. Let us make, here is the draft of decree we wrote to him. In 2 months, this decree came out and was signed by President. The decree was saying, the decree about prevention of the corruption. It was, in this decree, one can read that everything must be sold only on the auctions. Everything. Only on the auctions. The auctions must be public, equal. Everybody have to know about these auctions, and everything must go through the auctions. Then it was, comma, except the list of the goods, which would be in the presidential decrees. Second point, the government of Russian Federation have to adopt and develop this list of the goods, which would be exception from these auctions. Means it was not a preventing the corruption, it was a message to the corruption where to look. Yes. All corruption took the hands and went to the government saying, I'm prepared already to make the list, I'm here. So the list must be this and this and this. I met himself and I said, what is this? What is this? This is imitation. This is not workable. He said, but can you imagine, we can't put on the auction uranium. Say, okay, you can't put on the auction, put on the decree, say, except uranium, this and this, but not about the list, which would be adopted by the government. That's how it works. And even more, this decree exists, but now the government took a decision that 3 months it would not be used. Why? Nobody knows why. So it's much more complicated. Yes, please.
Unfortunately, we're at the end of the work rules here, so we'll take a short question and a short answer. And then what we'll have to do is, for the other people who are up, I apologize, but maybe we can get you to after, come down and say, hey, Grigori, for a second. Last question, please.
Before that meeting, I had a feeling that the politics is making, in Russia, the politics is making very often in sauna. Now I have a feeling that in Harvard as well, politics is making in sauna. But the number of people is much more, yeah?
My name is Raul Husseinov. I am a student in Kennedy School. My question is about Russia's foreign policy in so-called near abroad. I wonder, how would you comment illegal arms shipment by the government of Russia to Armenia at the worth of $1 billion during last 3 years, when Russia acts as one of the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group to achieve a peaceful solution to the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. As we all know that Azerbaijan is the only country in Caucasus which has no Russian troops on its soil and which has no Russian military bases, unlike its neighbors Georgia and Armenia. Is it a punishment to Azerbaijan and to President Aliyev for not accepting Russian troops and for developing its rich natural oil resources with Western oil companies with the purpose to export oil to the Western markets? Thank you.
If that is the real facts which you are saying, it's necessary to be proved. But if this is a real fact, I would comment that like corruption, first of all. And politics is a very small piece in this enterprise. They're simply paying for this weapon. That's what I was starting to say from the very beginning. That is the problem, one of the problems.
These figures were cleared out by Russian Defense Ministry.
So what?
That's exactly this.
That's what I'm explaining you already for 2 hours. That's exactly what I'm explaining you for 2 hours. Because we have the best Minister of Finance in the world. We had the best Minister. Yeltsin said that Khrushchev was the best Minister of Defense in the history. Sorry. This is our pain. This is our pain. That's why I'm saying that this is a serious problem. Yes?
Oil issue.
What?
Shipment of Azerbaijan's oil to the Western markets and Russia's role in that.
It may be the sentiment when the people are trying to convince some kind of a political people to make this trick. They're saying, you see, they have no troops, Russian, they want to send oil on the other direction, so it would be good to make such political tricks. But this is not the argument number one, as far as I feel it. But once again, if this is a real fact, I think that the number one reason, number two reason, number three, number five, number 10 is corruption. And political reasons are number 25, 27. This is not important.
So,
Okay.
good, we have to stop with this one, but we'll let the other people ask after. Let me say on behalf of the Harvard group, what a pleasure it's been to have Grigory Yavlinsky here. We'll look forward to his coming back, and we apologize for those who didn't get a chance to answer a question, but we told many people that at 7:30 they could escape for other places. So thank you very much.